Okay, we're officially live and we are now recording.
Okie dokie, welcome. We are 5 minutes from the official start of our Pivoting to Digital Organizing webinar, and so we will give it a few minutes for people to come on. So today, just for reference, is, wait, what is today? Today is Friday, March 20th. I think for most of us in Texas, this is this is kind of wrapping up the first full week of kind of locking down and hunkering down, sheltering in place, self-quarantining, whatever we really want to call it. This webinar was planned earlier this week as we were all kind of by the Texas Counts campaign, as we're all kind of acclimating to this time where we know that we should not be gathering and the orders to not publicly convene are becoming more and more direct and restrictive. And so we are glad that so many people are signed up to take this webinar. I think it's probably pretty obvious, but one of the things that kind of indicated to us the need for this is the fact that we cannot have a lot of the Census Day events that we were planning. And we know from our pooled fund applicants and from other census champions across the state and some of the work that Texas Counts and CFT and CPPP have been doing, that there's been a huge impact on a lot of our census champions across the state by not being able to convene and have lots of in-person events. So we will let more and more folks start to join, and we'll plan to get started right at 3 p.m. And so at a couple of points throughout today's webinar, we're going to have some live polling take place, not too terribly much, but we want to ensure that we're giving you news you can use. So some of you who may have already joined early may have already heard my spiel, but I want to just kind of give a little background for what brings us here today. I think that's all pretty obvious to us. We know that a lot of outreach plans have been affected by COVID-19 and the fact that many of us depend on events to do outreach and to list build and to get in front of people to kind of spread the word and be census champions. And so we want to make sure that we're empowering you with tools that you might use to kind of re-strategize right now. Just as a disclaimer and as a caveat, we'll put out there that a lot of what we're discussing is, pretty beginners kind of level stuff. We're going to give lots of previews of stuff, but we may not necessarily dig too much into the minutia because we intend to kind of keep this going and make sure that we're kind of responding to the needs of all of our census champions out there. And so you might start by now going to slido.com, maybe on your phone, and putting in the hashtag census pivot, or it's really going to be called like a meeting ID or an event ID. So if you go and pull that up, then in just a moment, we will go ahead and put up some live polling so that we can kind of guide the rest of today's webinar. This is being recorded, and so it'll be available for live reference. And we are definitely accepting questions through the chat box of Zoom. And we will be sure and keep you in the loop about any additional webinars we schedule. But for now, let's just jump right in. So let's start by going to our very first Slido question. And I'll give everyone a moment to go there. Again, that's slido.com. And you will put in the event ID census pivot. And we have our first question. So here we go. How has the cancellation of in-person events affected your outreach plans? Just kind of let's get a little gut check for how we think it's going to affect us right now. It looks like we already have 9 responses and that almost all of us feel like we are going to have to go back to the drawing board entirely. And that is definitely in line with kind of how we foresaw the disruption that is COVID-19 and the coronavirus pandemic affecting us. Let's give it just a little while longer. And so whenever we say in-person events, that could very well be include canvassing. It could be that you are having, you planned a Census Day event. And I'm hearing that my sound is a little wonky, so I'm gonna adjust to that disruption here very quickly. And give me just one moment. Okay, Katie is going to tell me if you all can hear me a little bit better now. Okay, here we go. Thank you for that. Having to be nimble and responsive, just like we are in our census outreach plans right now. So I think we probably know we have about 13 responses into our poll, but yeah, we're gonna have to go back to the drawing board on all of this. And so that's the purposes of today, and that's why we're so glad that you are a part. So let's go and dig in at this point. Okay, here we go. So let's think first just about at the highest level. Right now we are communicating in the midst of a crisis that we are all experiencing together, very disruptive, and I don't think any of us really saw each other, or rather, I don't think any of us really saw ourselves here, as we were all gearing up for census outreach last year. I know so many of you started working on this as early as 2018. I know a lot of organizations started to kind of think strategically last spring, and then we really spent all of last year getting ready for Q1, that awareness and the beginning of the motivation phase, and now everything is just a little disrupted. And so while I think most of us have a pretty good idea of exactly what it is that we want to say about the census, I think that we have to keep in mind that because of the way we're all experiencing this disruption right now, that is the pandemic, that we do have to be careful as we're messaging and as we're wanting to continue our census outreach work, to take a more personal approach, to make sure that we're asking people how they are, what their immediate needs are, and then let them know kind of what we're thinking about this. I know that we're all in the same boat, and I think that what I've seen in different organizations that I'm a part of, and even around the census, that people really just want to hear what we think. I'm thinking that this is going to go, and this is not, I'm not expressing a particular opinion or prognosis about the pandemic, but I do know that people like to hear, well, I think it's going to go away as quickly as it came, or I really do think that this is going to be our new normal for 3-4 months. It's okay to have a personal take. I think it's okay to have an opinion. And then to kind of ease into the conversation about the census. So what that's really looked like for me is, hey, before I forget, did you happen to get your invitation to self-respond? I've been asking a lot of people. And that kind of eases us into the conversation about the census. I'm finding that a lot of people in my orbit, they're having a similar response. Oh yeah, I did get it. And honestly, things have been so crazy that I haven't taken the time to respond. I think I have it as my next slide. But maybe I'll just jump ahead, and just to give a personal touch, I'll show, and I don't expect you to read this necessarily, but I'll show an exchange that I had with my landlord recently. So my landlord is a super smart person. She is an art critic and a writer, and she's very civically engaged and politically involved. And we had already been talking about the census, because I just kind of asked her, hey, I haven't seen the form come in the mail. Have you seen the form come in the mail, or the invitation to respond? And so she finally texted me, or she called me rather, whenever she got the form, or the letter. I keep saying form, but I think we all know I mean the invitation to respond. And so we had already kind of started a discussion about it, just a very informal discussion. Hey, did we get it? So the moment she got it, then she texted me, or rather she called me. And we were really excited because we got our invitation to respond. But I found that she was a little confused because she was used to getting a census form, like the questionnaire form. And so whenever she opened it and read it, then she actually thought that she spoke too soon, that actually she didn't have what she needed to respond to the census. And she kind of misinterpreted the invitation to respond as there's something more that's coming. And so I took that opportunity to kind of discuss with her what I know about the census internet self-response and the fact that we really want folks to come online and on the phone to respond. And so anything we can do right now to kind of just keep that drumbeat going about this is the time that we're supposed to be filling out the census. There is nothing more that we're waiting for, I think is still pretty vital. So that's just kind of rethinking how we communicate. We also want to rethink, obviously, our strategies and what assets we have right now. I know most of us are working from home, and we are past probably the hurdle of figuring out how we need to cancel our events and then communicate that in kind of crisis mode. And so now I think it's probably time to start thinking about what assets we have. So for any of us who may have access to email lists, then we have to think about how we might utilize those. Maybe you're already utilizing those. If you did have any events planned and you had some form of registration for those, then if you use Eventbrite, you have email data. And if you were using maybe even something like paperless posts, then you have email data. I'm trying to think of Evite. Yeah, Evite's another good one. And so maybe you don't have something that you consider an email list right now. But you can maybe leverage some of the tools that you were using to plan and get people at your events to kind of harvest that data. And we'll talk a little bit more about what forms of email communication there are out there. Really think about your social media reach. And the reason I say that is because I know that it seems like we're always being told, you know, social media is powerful, leverage your social media. But we really want to take this opportunity to think about whether or not the efforts that we're going to put into social media are going to be, are going to have the greatest reach for us. I was looking at the Nueces County Complete Count Committee Facebook page the other day and noticed they actually have really good reach. There's like 2,500 followers of that. And so I was super duper impressed by that. And so that's on a Facebook page. So on a Facebook page with that many followers, then that's a lot of organic reach. But then also it really probably makes sense at that point. And we'll talk about Facebook advertising in just a little bit at the highest level. But it probably makes sense once you have that many followers to not only think about what sort of organic reach you're getting, but getting more information in front of them through Facebook advertising just to those who like your page and friends of those who like your page. However, I do think that social media is one of those things, and especially on Facebook and using Facebook pages, where you can kind of spin your wheels, because if you are starting from scratch or you don't have that audience already or don't have an audience built in, then maybe that's not where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, in which case maybe you just want to start thinking about more personal networks. So what I mean by that is right now, who has a built-in network? I think educators and administrators have a pretty far reach and also have some data, depending on what level of education you're at. Neighborhood associations. I have been thinking a lot about the power of neighborhood and civic associations and doing census outreach work. You know, even associations that are non-mandatory. So in my neighborhood, we do not have a mandatory HOA. What we do have is a neighborhood association that is a 501c3, and that has a voluntary membership. And so because people have over the last, you know, I guess we've been around 45 years, been members, we had phone numbers and opted to become members. We have phone numbers and we have email addresses. And so in a little bit, we'll talk about how we might leverage the power of neighborhood associations right now in our organizing. And then we just have our social groups and our own individual social networks. And I think right now, one thing that we want to be careful about is really cutting through the noise of the pandemic. So kind of going back to that point about how we're communicating in a time of crisis, then we want to find some way to sensitively kind of cut through that noise. But one thing we all know to be true, I would love to see some analytics on this, but I think that we all know this anecdotally, is that folks are spending a lot of time on social media right now because we're all sheltering in place. Now, let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit of platforms and tools. So, let's just take a step back and think about where your people are. Are the stakeholders in your community, or is your audience affinity based, or is it geographically based? Because if it's affinity based, then we're really going to rely on those social tools and individuals kind of sharing and spreading the word in their social networks. Or is it geographical? In which case we still need to figure out how we're going to access folks. But it may be a little easier to target, maybe using something like Facebook advertising, or kind of a hybrid approach of social networks that are geographically based. We also, going back to that point about where we actually have the greatest reach, we want to think about outreach versus broadcasting right now. And I think sometimes social media is thought of as outreach, but if we just don't have that audience already, if we just don't have a built-in audience, then that's not really outreach, that's broadcasting, and broadcasting really depends on who's watching. Outreach is kind of having a strategy for how you're going to go and find people and bring them into your fold so they actually receive your message. I really think right now it's crucial to think about the power of the personal touch. And so we'll talk about this later on. But I think before focusing too terribly much on, list building and trying to get everybody into an e-blast platform or something like that, then while we all have this kind of opportunity to revisit our strategy, then we can think about our own personal connection to the census and how we want to message around that personally, and then start to model that for other people. Again, cutting through the noise, I think, is going to be really tricky right now. As a campaign, Texas Counts is going to start testing and then experimenting with kind of finding a message that is relevant to people, since whether most of us are thinking about it like this or not, public health is at the top of our minds. And we're looking for our elected officials and local officials, really officials at all levels, to do something and to make an informed decision. And so we do think that there is a way that you can appropriately, without getting too much into advocacy or politics, communicate that census data is crucial to making sure that our officials can make informed decisions, especially about our public health. So that was my lovely exchange with my landlord. So what motivated us again was knowing that we have to retool around events. So our assumption is that, and I think everybody's responses to our little poll kind of prove this, are that a lot of events have been canceled, and we may not even know when we're going to be able to pick back up on that. I also think, and as the invitation to respond has gone out and is in people's hands and mailboxes, that it's really crucial that we catch any inappropriate messaging around Census Day, because I have heard a lot that, oh my gosh, but what if we don't respond by April 1st, as if that's some sort of cutoff, and there's really two ways of misleading on that. I think some people are under the impression that they only have until April 1st to respond, which is really scary, and then I think other people have the impression that that you can't respond until April 1st. And so we want to take this as an opportunity. Maybe we're softening a lot of messaging that we had in the lead up to Census Day. If we have any existing kind of social media or a website or any assets, we might even consider, and this is not official Texas Counts campaign advice, but we might consider just looking at those again and just kind of removing them for a little while there's this uncertainty around, where we'll be in less than 2 weeks is Census Day. And so we just want to be very sensitive to the fact that that April 1st day looks a little different to us today than it did as we were all formulating our plans throughout last fall and at the beginning of this year. So let's do another little gut check over here, and let's think about some of those things that I just covered, meaning who we think we're going to reach. So let's go back here. We already answered that question. Thank you so much for all of your data there. And let's see, it looks like we have a question from Cole. Cole, we'll come back to your question if that's okay. Because I want to get back to my poll here. Okay, so this is the question that I want us all to answer. So if we go to slido.com again, wherever we had that pulled up, and go to hashtag or whatever event ID census pivot, want to get some feels for whether or not you feel like you have good data and reach for your target audience, no matter what groups you were going to focus on, if any particular hard to count groups or any geographical areas. One thing that we have had in the 2020 census is some very, very useful geographical data on hard to count parts of Texas. But maybe you're working in more affinity and social groups. So let's just kind of see these numbers roll in here. Okay, with 12 responses. Ooh, this is some heartening data, you guys. Look at this. We have a lot of emails. We have some large social followings. This is lovely. Okay, excellent, excellent. I was so afraid that we were not going to have any data for the most part. And so this is really, really exciting. I'll give about, let's give it 30 seconds to respond. And let's see, I'm going to take a look at Cole's question while we are giving some time to respond. What formats work best for you? What we use to get your events online? Twitter chats, live web streams, social media, stories, posts, anything else? So Cole, we'll probably revisit this question. Now, this is kind of part of Texas Counts strategy lately, is that we really want to, what we're really trying to do is kind of meet people where they are. And what we mean by that is we've been willing to concede that, for those of us who are maybe part of local governments or nonprofits, who tend to work in policy and data, that sometimes our approach can be a little wonky. And so we're thinking specifically about where we can reach the most people who are not policy or civic minded. And so our general thinking is that that's going to be on a place more like Facebook and Nextdoor, maybe Instagram too. Twitter is great for reaching media and reaching kind of policy people and thinkers is kind of our assumption. So we're typically going to focus on here more peer-to-peer stuff, but we can pick back up on specific social media platforms and strategies in some of our upcoming webinars. But for here, we're really thinking about peer-to-peer reach because we think that's going to be especially powerful right now. Okay, so we have 18 responses and 61% of you say that you feel like you have good data and reach for your target audience via your large social following. So that's very useful for us as a campaign at Texas Counts, because what that means is that we, as we put out more and more on the Texas Counts social media, that you'll find some value to that to just simply share out. I think that we have a good sense of what to do with that information. So I'm going to give a little bit of a case study here. So I happen to be on the board of an organization called the Lambda Center in Houston. And the Lambda Center is a social services kind of nonprofit. And what they focus on is providing support groups and 12-step recovery groups for the LGBTQ community in Houston. And so the reason I picked them as an example is because everything they do is in person. So you can imagine that most support groups, they just kind of function best whenever people are live and face-to-face and able to interact with one another. But this organization had to close its doors last week and will be closed for at least 2 weeks. And so they did a very quick pivot to online meetings, online support meetings. And so whenever we talk about Zoom very briefly in just a moment, then we'll talk about some of the best practices they've developed in moving to digital in a way that they really never thought they ever would. As we think about targeting and outreach, then I want to take this opportunity to share, or rather plug, the CUNY hard to count map. And I know almost all of us are totally familiar with this map, and we've probably done a little bit of playing around with it ourselves, but let's go ahead and just really dig in a way that I don't know that we always have the opportunity to. So here we go. I happen to have it pulled up right now, and I wanted to really draw your attention to 2 things. One, the fact that this is going to be the very first year, if you look in the bottom right-hand side, where the self-response rate will be available for in real time. So that data was supposed to come out starting today, and I know that we as a campaign are kind of probing to see if anybody thinks that we're still on track to do that. But at Census Hard to Count Maps 2020.us, very soon we should have some real-time data that's going to help us start to target communities. We won't spend too terribly much time on this, but I do just want to make you all aware of kind of how easy it is to get pretty granular with how you can target some outreach efforts. And I'll just say that all of this, we're going to come back to another case study of how we might leverage the power of a neighborhood association and reaching kind of hard to count census tracts. So let us start by just looking at something that we're probably all pretty comfortable with, which is the county level for Harris County. Harris County here in Houston is known to be have a pretty high percentage of hard to count populations and census tracts. And so what I did there was just kind of switch to the county view, find Harris County, and now and this has only been true for the last couple of weeks, but at the hard to count map, then the default view is this self-response rate, or rather self-response rate map. And you'll notice I didn't change anything to get to this view. And so as this data starts to get fed in, we're just looking at 2010 for right now. Then anytime you come here and start to search by county, or if you happen to be working at the census tract level and be familiar with which census tracts are part of your stakeholder group, then it'll be pretty easy to kind of revisit this. It's kind of hard to bookmark, but it's pretty easy to revisit on a daily basis. And so these colors are really telling us, kind of minimize something that makes this easier for me. These colors are really telling us, orange is not good. That's 50%, this kind of burnt orange color, I'll zoom in a little bit, is a 50% or less self-response rate in the 2010 census. Blue, the bluer we get, the better we are here. And so the darkest shade of blue, like this tract right here, is a self-response rate of over 83% for this neighborhood in Houston. So let's say I, again, am coming back to my example of the Houston Heights Association, that non-mandatory neighborhood association. And I'm looking at their self-response rate, and it looks like they're somewhere in the middle. So this kind of, we see in the key off to the right that this light blue color is a 66.5 to 70% self-response rate. Not terribly great, but obviously it gets worse. But let's say I am doing some outreach in this area, and I am personally pretty involved in this organization. And so I already plan to kind of do some census outreach. We have a monthly general meeting where all of the membership kind of gets together and we kind of have fun topics around it and have a theme. We've canceled those. So my plans to set up a table at the monthly general meeting of the Houston Heights Association are out of question right now. And then we were going to have a volunteer appreciation dinner at the beginning of next month that we've already canceled proactively. And I'm trying to think of another event that we're trying to fundraise to rebuild one of our parks. And so we're going to have a table set up at the park. Now the park is closed, right? So I have used the Hard to Count 2020 map to identify what is, one, a neighborhood that I have a connection to and that has a pretty average, definitely could be better self-response rate for 2010. And then this is really also in the neighborhood too, this one that's just a shade below and has about a 62 to 66.5% self-response rate. Let's see, did anybody say earlier today confirm? Oh, excellent. So Sarah Ricks just told us, we can all see that because that's to all of us, that based on a conference call earlier, the 2020 census confirmed the Hard to Count map will be updated later this evening. Thank you so much, Sarah. That is very encouraging. And so I have used this map to decide that I want to try to reach folks in the Houston Heights. So now let's, again, using kind of this Houston Heights example, keep that in mind so that we can think about how we're going to drill down on efforts digitally and how we might gather some data around that. So before we do that, I just wanted to give a heads up that, we understand that Zoom has become pretty critical in everything that we're doing right now. And so because you are on a Zoom call, then we will not spend a lot of time talking about Zoom. We understand it's critical, but it's also intuitive and pretty flexible for our needs. So all we're linking to and mentioning in this presentation is that the Zoom website has extensive training. If you were to click this link or even just go to their website. Let's return back to that case study of the Lambda Center in Houston. Not doing census work, but just a good example of an organization having to make quickly and nimbly the pivot to digital. So some of the best practices they've developed are, let's just do the pro account. We're a nonprofit. It was not in our budget, but that $15 a month is going to be very well spent for us at this time. They also, because the meetings are growing, have invested in what's called the large meeting add-on with the pro account for Zoom. And so that allows them to have, instead of up to 100 participants, up to 300 participants. And so I know that most of you are very familiar with Zoom. Again, you're literally on a Zoom call right now. And so I don't want to spend too much time recapping stuff that you probably already know. But again, to state some best practices, we found that because now it's not just kind of us, nerdy conference call type people who are participating in these Zoom calls, but we're trying to make it as available to everyone, as open to everyone else as possible. Then we're just eliminating barriers for now, like a passcode. We have rethought registration because while many of you may be familiar with kind of getting a link and going and filling out a form and adding it to your calendar, then for us, what's worked best is to create a meeting with no passcode. So it's really just click to join, don't have to create a Zoom account, automatically download the app on your phone or on your device, and just make sure that we're broadcasting the fact that we are having, I think at this point that center is up to 4 meetings a day. And what they do is they've just set them up as a recurring meeting, and they have a standing short link so that they can just kind of share out on their social media, hey, at 6:30 p.m., p.m. we're having this meeting, or at 8 p.m. we're having this meeting, and here's the short link, and just go here at 8 p.m. And they don't require any sort of registration, because anything we're finding that kind of takes people outside of their comfort zone is just one more barrier to their participation. And so let's, ground this back in the census again. And maybe we want to host a live Q&A for y'all have that wonderful social media following we saw from our Slido poll. And so maybe you want to experiment with either a Facebook Live event or something like a live Zoom Q&A. That would be, if I was going to just put this out on social media, that would be a wonderful reason to not have registration or a passcode, and just create a short link where I can say, hey, please go here at 7 p.m. tonight. We'll be live taking questions for 2 hours, something like that. So I think we all know how powerful Zoom is right now. For this and for anything else, if you have really specific kind of weedsy questions about any of this stuff, put them in the chat box. And if we don't get to them today, we'll be sure and capture all of those questions so that we can kind of tackle them one-on-one. So that is Zoom. And then before we dig back into our little case study, then I will say we won't spend too much time talking about Facebook today. It is a can of worms. We see this Facebook can of worms here. And we see ourselves doing lots of dedicated pivoting to digital webinars just around Facebook. We have been excited to start to connect with some great experts in this field who are going to give us lots of tips and best practices. And so you can anticipate that some of the topics we'll be covering will be around live events. I would love to spend some time thinking about the advantages of Facebook pages versus groups versus personal accounts. We'll talk a little bit about Facebook advertising. And for now, the only thing I would like you to do related to Facebook is, if you haven't already, go to @TexasCounts and like the Texas Counts Facebook page, because we are going to make an effort to post more and more. So this week, we have put out almost all of the great resources that came from the Count All Kids campaign and the lead up to Count All Kids Day, which was the 18th. However, the message is still perfectly valid that all kids count. And so we're going to continue kind of using those resources really actively in the next week, because it's still Count All Kids Week and all kids count. Okay, so let's go back to this example of the Houston Heights Association, which has kind of a mixed bag of medium self-response. So one thing that we may not be thinking about right now, and the reason I kind of front-loaded onto this webinar, is because Nextdoor is one of those things that either you love it because it's easy and because there's really relevant hyper-local information on there for you, or you hate it because there is a lot of passion around Nextdoor. I don't want to call it NIMBYism, but a lot of times it is. But I think it's a very powerful tool. It is people who you see out and about in your neighborhood. It has reach into neighborhoods on the block by block level. I think we need local census champions. And then the other powerful thing about Nextdoor that is sometimes underutilized is that local agencies can apply to be on Nextdoor. And so you submit an application, whether you are the constable or the police chief, or you're a health department or a planning department. And that's a really, really easy way to broadcast messages. Right now, we're seeing a lot around coronavirus and COVID-19, obviously, but it is definitely a way to help get the word out about the census too. So for those of you who may be a little unfamiliar, I'll just pull up Nextdoor so that we can kind of see how the interface of it. It's a pretty intuitive as far as social media goes. I'll just kind of give you all a sneak peek at this. Again, this neighborhood that I was referring to, the Houston Heights, there's about 8,000 households total in the Heights, but the little corner that I'm in is just about 2,500 households, and you can have multiple members per household. So in my neighborhood of the Houston Heights, we happen to have a lot of like garage apartments and little tiny, secondary dwelling units. And so that kind of hard, medium-ish, hardish to count area of the Houston Heights that I'm looking at here is definitely within my reach as a neighbor on Nextdoor, as we can see from this little outline here. And so that means that anything I post as just a neighbor here is going to reach a lot of folks who are living in this area and have historically had a very average to count kind of rate there. And so to go back to Nextdoor, right now, again, one of the reasons I mentioned this early on is because there is a certain amount of verification that takes place in becoming connected on Nextdoor, because it wants to verify that you live where you say you live. And so in the upper right hand side, by kind of the typical profile login sort of situation, then you see this person with a plus, which is how you can have other neighbors invite you to a Nextdoor that's in your area, or you can invite others. And so it's kind of part of that expanding your audience kind of early on right now. I think a lot of people who may have been resistant to Nextdoor before may be a little more open to participating in it now, because we're looking for local information, right? So I am just going to take this opportunity to search and see what kind of conversation is happening around the census in my very neighborhood, my own backyard. Yes, in my backyard. And it looks like one of the posts that is, I would say the Nextdoor algorithm is pretty smart. So it is based on how we don't like things in Nextdoor. We thank people for them. And I see that one of the top posts is actually from the City of Houston Planning and Development Department, and they have a campaign that is #Yes to the Census 2020. And it doesn't look like there's very much discussion around it. It just looks like 56 folks have thanked the Houston Planning and Development Department. What I really want to find is, and I'll go back to that really quickly, because, and I'll put this in a follow-up to today's webinar, but you'll see there's a little note up here that says that public agencies have limited access on Nextdoor. And so I'm going to pull that up so that I am sure to share that out. I did notice from kind of looking at who RSVP'd that some of us do work for local governments and local government agencies. And so that is definitely something to apply for. It's pretty quick to apply, but it is not. It's not it's quick to submit an application, but Nextdoor, they add features pretty quickly, and so sometimes they can't quite keep up in their turnaround of stuff, and so I will be sure and put that in our follow-up notes. I'm looking for a neighbor who has posted about the census. So let's just scroll down here a little bit. Ooh, this is a good one. So somebody posted stranger rings doorbell. Oh, okay. This is this is kind of fun, and I won't spend too much time on this, I promise, because we do have other topics. But it looks like somebody plugged in some census information, because somebody said, "Hey, a stranger rings doorbell," and then somebody else said, "Well, the census takers do start coming this time of year." I mean, they're wrong. I don't think that was a census taker, but it just kind of goes to show that it's an interesting way to kind of connect with your neighbors and find different ways to plug the census and see what kind of discussion is going on. So. Nextdoor, join it, get invited if you need to, invite others, and consider posting about the census in your in your Nextdoor kind of neighborhood and reach. Maybe get a conversation going that isn't really happening in your neighborhood. Be a resource, offer to kind of help anybody guess, or rather help anybody kind of discern whether or not you all kind of have a good self-response rate and whether there are any questions. Okay, so that was my plug for Nextdoor. I think it can be very, very powerful. Also, I will say that local businesses can advertise on Nextdoor. Some of the most popular products on Nextdoor are real estate offices. And so real estate offices can pay a couple $100 to kind of show up in the feed of Nextdoor. with some sponsored posts. And so I think it wouldn't be the worst idea. And they're called neighborhood sponsors. So if you see in the upper right-hand side, then Ramirez Roofing is a neighborhood sponsor. I really don't think it would be out of line to reach out to some of these local businesses and say, hey, I see that you're a neighborhood sponsor on Nextdoor. I'm wondering if you might post something for awareness and motivation around the 2020 census. It's very important to our neighborhood, and kind of give your standard census talking points and see if they might leverage some of their advertising around that. Okie dokie. So again, that was just an overview about Nextdoor. Let me know if you have any experience you would like to share about Nextdoor in a follow-up, or you have more questions and we can stand to drill down on that more. I will not also spend that much time talking about MailChimp. It did seem like a lot of you had good email data, and I would assume that you're already using something like MailChimp or Constant Contact to reach the folks that you have good email data on. And so one thing I will say is that if you have a lot of emails that may be in a spreadsheet, or maybe they're spread out across a couple of different databases, maybe you have a CRM or some kind of fundraising database where they live, then now is the perfect opportunity to just get them into MailChimp. MailChimp is a freemium app, meaning you can have up to 2,000 email addresses in MailChimp for free. And then their lowest tier comes with the ability to kind of schedule e-blasts around the best predictive time. You get to take off that little monkey that's at the bottom of a free MailChimp email for just $50 a month. So I highly recommend that if you kind of have your email data spread out, that you take this as an opportunity to migrate it into a free MailChimp account, or even a $50 a month MailChimp account. Okie dokie, let's keep moving. Now, I want to talk a little bit about texting, and I think that we've seen throughout this year, one thing that we're all doing a lot of this year that we have not done, that we weren't doing in 2010, certainly to some extent, but we're doing it a whole lot more, is texting. And so hopefully you have had the opportunity to sign up for some of the pledge to texts, or rather text to pledge programs like what the United Way has. I signed up, I think about 3 weeks ago. I took that pledge to be counted with the United Way. And since then, I've gotten some pretty useful messaging from the United Way. And thank you to anybody who is connected to a United Way on this call. But then whenever we talk about text banking, then we have some great scripts, and we all know to kind of send people to 2020census.gov, but maybe if you're anything like me, then that kind of like text banking thing is a little nebulous to me, because I don't know if that means I'm just supposed to go through my phone, or how I can be a little more strategic or systematic about it. So I want to talk about two apps in particular, and one is Reach, which unfortunately is available on iOS only. But this is a wonderful peer-to-peer texting tool that I'll demonstrate, because I think it's a worthy wormhole to go down. And it is just a way you can be a census champion. And then we'll also talk a little bit about Remind. Remind is truly a mass texting system that actually gives you two-way communication. I think this was developed for the education space. And so if you happen to work in education, you may already be familiar with this tool. This is a way for principals and teachers to communicate with parents and their classrooms without having to actually make it come from your cell phone number. It's kind of a text-based, but you're not giving away your phone number. It also has this powerful ability to import phone numbers. So without going back and forth and looking at that data, it did seem like a lot of us didn't have a lot of phone numbers that were really heavy on email addresses. And so I thought I would spend a significant amount of time on this, but now I'm just going to give you a brief overview of both of these. So let's go back and talk about Reach just a little bit. And I'm going to use a real world example of Reach here. Okay, so I have the Reach app on my phone, and I will pull it up. And this is what you see whenever you first download the Reach app. There is a certain amount that you can do for free in the Reach app on the or you'll download it on the iOS store. I put a link in there. But a lot of the features are a one-time payment of, I think, $10 that is about the best $10 I've ever spent. And what this is kind of scaled peer-to-peer texting. So I'll just kind of show you, we are in what's called the messaging function of Reach, and then you can quickly skip over to the groups function to see kind of how it is that you're going to tailor your messages, right? So I've just started, this is just specifically to Census. I'm thinking about my audience and who it is that I'm going to try to reach using my kind of peer-to-peer texting. And so in here, I've gone through my phone and I've added a couple of people who I think are going to give me, you know, a lot of bang for my text outreach buck. I have, ooh, and I probably shouldn't be showing real phone numbers, so I'm going to get out of that. But I call it city employees, but really who that is kind of people I think who are going to have some influence in my city. So that was the police chief and the first daughter of Houston. We don't have a first lady, but we have a first daughter as the mayor, or rather at the city level here in Houston. I might also have a group that's something like HOA presidents and HOA leadership. So what I would do is go and add to that group the president of my neighborhood association, the Houston Heights Association. Or I might add, we also have an executive director of that organization. And so I might also have a category that is folks who I know who have a large social following. I had to be neighbors with someone who's just this really unassuming interior designer, but I follow her on Instagram, and because she's really kind of cool on Instagram, she has 13,000 followers. And so I might go and encourage her to post something about the census in her story. So what that really looks like is you go and you bucket your folks into groups like we were just discussing, and then you craft what is basically a mass text message, and it's just starting a conversation. So unlike most kind of mass texting systems, then what this is really going to do is give you the ability to send one-off text that you can customize. And so I have just started the conversation with this kind of generic question about whether the people I'm texting have received the invitation to respond. And what's going to happen is that when I get ready to send that, and let's just say that I'm going to send it to this group of city employees, then it's going to tee up a real text that comes from my phone number. That little swirly that was in there is a merge tag that's going to put in the first name of the person who I'm sending it to. And I actually have the ability to then I'm going to respond. Somebody asked, what is the name of this text system? And it's called Reach on the iOS store. And, you know, Ashley and I text from time to time, and this is pretty, you know, generic, but let's just say I have a special nickname for Ashley, which I don't think I have one for her, but she has one for me. And maybe I want to throw in something a little more personal, like an inside joke that we have or something like that. And so this gives me the opportunity to even further customize a text that I've already kind of crafted so that it doesn't seem too odd whenever I'm kind of going and doing more direct outreach, or rather whenever I'm talking to people who are truly my friends and peers. So that is the Reach app. I'm going to stop sending this text. I think that would be a little odd if I sent that right now. I think it's a pretty intuitive app. I highly recommend going and downloading that. However, maybe we truly have phone data for a large group of people, and we don't want it to come directly from our phone. And that's where the Remind app comes in. I think the Remind app is a little more complicated, but whenever we're working on large campaigns like this, then it comes in handy, especially if we have a couple of people on our folks who are going to be helping us with this mass texting. I always refer back to a time that here in Houston, the Remind app, as opposed to the Reach app, was super helpful for me in doing volunteer coordination and outreach after Hurricane Harvey here in Houston. And so, because we had a form where folks had submitted their phone numbers if they wanted to volunteer or if they needed some form of assistance after Harvey, then I was able to go to the desktop version of Remind, import these phone numbers, and then start kind of two-way communication. I called those who were asking for help, my Harvey Relief neighbors, and I was able to craft these mass texts to them. So here was one that I sent. I don't know that anybody, was here in Houston around this time, or even in a part of Texas that was affected by Harvey. But the Red Cross was giving that $400 cash assistance, and I wanted to bring this to the top of mind for everybody before the deadline to apply passed. And so that was a really good. I think this was probably 400 folks that I was able to text from here, telling them something that I thought was pretty important. They didn't see my phone number. They had the opportunity to reply. I'm looking for if I had any kind of, yeah, here we go. I had some text exchanges with people after this. And so this is, again, for truly mass texting. This is the Remind app, and I'm hoping that we can just sort of demystify what it really looks like to do that kind of text banking. So again, download the apps. We should all have plenty of time to kind of play around with these apps. And so I just wanted to put those on your radar. The last thing I'm going to mention is an app called SlyDial, and I don't know how useful it's going to be, especially because it seems like we're a group that has more email data than phone data. But what SlyDial does is allow you to send voicemails without actually doing a phone call, and so it's not quite a robodial. What it does, and I'm a little nebulous on the technology behind it, but what it really does is allow you to send a voicemail directly to someone's voicemail box on their phone. And so I've always thought it's a little creepy. I just kind of wanted to put it out there while we're talking about phone banking. Sometimes, even though I'm sure a lot of us have done phone banking, for different either political campaigns or maybe local issues, then I think it can still be kind of nerve-wracking to do phone banking. We already know that whenever we're doing phone banking, most people don't pick up. And so I just wanted to kind of make you aware of SlyDial, which is a way for you to basically record a message and then send it to folks. Again, you could use this just for peer-to-peer. Maybe you don't want to bother your friends right now by, calling them. I think that we're probably all perfectly willing to make phone calls right now, but maybe SlyDial them a message about the census. And I can't think of any examples where I've seen anybody do this terribly well, but it's just a tool that I could show you all at least. But it is just a tool that is out there if you happen to have phone numbers. Okay, it looks like I have another Slido question for us. I wonder what that is. Okie dokie, we'll close that poll and we'll close this Q&A. Okay, so I will start to let you all respond to this question. Again, go back to slido.com, wherever you had that pulled up, enter census pivot, and let us know, out of we discussed today, I know we breezed through a lot of stuff, but really this is just information gathering, trying to get you to think a little differently about some of your digital organizing and what kind of tools you would really benefit from out of what we discussed today. And you should be able to just enter in any short answer response to this. I'm not 100% sure they'll even really show up on the screen, but you can also use the Q&A feature or the chat box to let us know what you want to hear more of. So while we're doing this, or while this is up, I'll go see what kind of questions have come into our chat box. So here we go. Marla has asked, my biggest question is tracking interactions from the bottom up, as in the people we empower say on Nextdoor to share about census and let us know how many people they reached. I see what you mean, Marla. So, and Marla, your other question was about Nextdoor in general. Is Nextdoor good for renters? Nextdoor is great for renters. This is a wonderful opportunity to use that invite feature. On Nextdoor, because a lot of homeowners are on Nextdoor, and sometimes Nextdoor will even kind of do targeted mailing to try to get more people to join where they don't have a high percentage of participants, but they do have like an active Nextdoor setup. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for landlords and realtors and folks in HOAs to invite renters to actually join Nextdoor. So I'll just use myself as an example. I live in a tiny house that's on someone else's property, and both my landlord and I are both on Nextdoor, which is great. And so I think I invited her, which is kind of funny. But anybody can apply to join, and it's not even like you have to be invited. Like, let's say you know renters and you want them to be on Nextdoor, they can even just go and sign up, and then there's going to be a couple of steps they can take to verify the fact that they live in a certain area. They can have a neighbor verify them, or they can get a postcard in the mail that's going to allow them to be verified at their address. I can see how Nextdoor is especially powerful because we're wanting to count people at their addresses, right? So I will say, to answer your question, because it sounds like what you're trying to determine about tracking interactions is kind of who's actually seeing and responding to your to the post that you're putting out there. So Facebook is great if you have a Facebook page or a Facebook group in kind of tracking how many folks have viewed or engaged with your post. In groups, you can actually see who in a Facebook group has viewed your post. And whenever you run something like a Facebook ad, all you really see is the number of impressions and the amount of engagement, whether it's clicks or I think you can even see who saved something in Facebook, but it sounds like, and we see right in front of us, we want a whole webinar just about Facebook. And that was basically already in our plans, but now we have confirmed that we know y'all want to know more about Facebook. I see easily one very robust webinar, or at least 2 webinars around Facebook. Just to kind of put this on your radar as far as Facebook goes, we tend to still think about Facebook in terms of Facebook pages, but I think right now that groups are just as powerful, if not more powerful. And what that means is that, you know, organizations can have Facebook groups, but organizations can't join groups that are maybe, I'll use this for purposes of illustration, actually. Because I did have this pulled up already. So let's just continue along with my example of the Houston Heights Association. And let's just say I was totally totally clueless about what kind of folks are doing work in the Houston Heights, you know, groups that I could be a part of or other pages that I could link to. And you'll see I just came and searched Houston Heights, and I can go to the groups and see that there's all kinds of groups in the Heights that are groups that I could join. And this is kind of why I wanted to show and kind of separate it from how we typically think about Facebook with pages. I could request to join any of these groups. Some are private, some are public, and I can start to spread the word about the census in these groups. Now, folks do get a little sensitive sometimes. It probably helps to focus on, you know, kind of neighborhood association groups and civic groups who are already kind of motivated and mobilized around kind of civic causes. If I went into the Greater Houston Heights Area Real Estate Group and posted something about, actually, I could come up with a great message to send to the Houston Heights Area Real Estate Group, because realtors heavily depend on census data. Through the National Association of Realtors, they can do these type of marketing reports called RPR reports. I can't remember what it stands for, but I would just kind of let the juices flow and see what came up. But I just wanted to make sure that for now, we all are starting to think about the fact that it's not just I have a Facebook page and I want to post on there and advertise from there. I think that we should leverage the power of groups as well. Let's see what other questions we have coming up here. So Marla, I hope that I've kind of touched on the answer to your question, is that with Nextdoor, really the only form of analytics you can do have to do with a number of kind of thank yous and the commenting from there. It's not as robust as something like Twitter impressions or Facebook impressions. It's interesting. Nextdoor kind of came out of nowhere a couple of years ago, and like I said, they add a lot of features. It does get a little buggy, and something like the kind of analytics you're describing aren't entirely available, but I still think it's pretty useful just for kind of reaching people locally. Any other questions? This is great. I know we're basically at the end of our time, but we'll keep this open for just a little bit. Okay, so I'll tell you what. I will start to wrap it up, but I will definitely stay around for any additional questions and just let you know these kind of next steps as we envision them. I want to stop, having my face all close to this mic, and let me share my screen again. So yeah, I will just say, as in terms of next steps, then it sounds like it makes most sense for us to schedule our next webinar for at least early next week and focus that around Facebook. Please send any questions you have to info@texascounts.org. And I think you all, however it is that you found out about this, you can make your way to the Texas Counts campaign, namely me, Katie Martin, and Robin Paoli, who do a lot of the communications for. There we go. Katie just put in our chat box, info@texascounts.org. We definitely all, want to be a go-to resource for you and kind of re-strategizing right now. And so let us know what you want to hear more of. We definitely understand that there is a great need to re-strategize. And so we just want to be there for you and be your partners in this. Remember, we're a partner connector hub. And so please let us know how we can kind of formulate these and design these to be more useful to you. Again, thank you for bearing with us today, as it was really not only something that we kind of very responsibly and nimbly put together, but is intended to be an overview. And so we understand that we didn't get too terribly detailed in this. And like I said, I will stick around for some kind of additional one-on-one Q&A, but if you're making your way out, just stay tuned for the next webinar that we schedule. And thank you so much for joining us today and for interacting with us.